Because of a legal dispute involving the company, all my assets were frozen. Lena, my adopted daughter, asked me for the new villa, claiming it was her New Year's gift. I explained the situation to her and said I would make it up to her in the future. But she immediately changed her expression and smashed the glass in her hand. Do you think I'm an idiot? What kind of situation leads to frozen assets? Just say it, you're broke. I knew you couldn't be trusted. Always showing off with a bit of money. Serves you right. She cursed with an ugly look on her face while pulling out a termination of adoption agreement she had clearly prepared beforehand. I looked at her in disappointment, the words stuck in my throat. The company's dispute had already been resolved. There were only 3 more days until my assets would be unfrozen. After working with the police to resolve the company's financial dispute, I returned to my home on the outskirts of Los Angeles, body aching with exhaustion. At the end of the driveway, a dark gray Bentley SUV sat quietly, its headlights flashing twice. I had just stepped onto the porch when Lena burst through the front door and ran toward me, throwing her arms around me in excitement. Mom, you're finally back. I missed you so much. I gently patted her back, my voice soft but laced with fatigue. It's only been a few days. You missed me that much already? She blinked up at me, grinning like a carefree child. This girl, she really did once make me believe life could still hold a kind of tenderness. 3 years ago, I had volunteered with a local youth outreach program, helping the foster care agency screen families for temporary placements. That was when Lena had just come out of her 3rd foster home. Her mother had been arrested on drug charges, and her father had been out of the picture for years. Financially, her situation was dire. There was no one left to take care of her, and the court had placed her under state custody. By then she was already worn out by the very idea of family. The first time I met her, she was leaning against a window in the corner of the classroom, clutching a nearly empty sticky notepad in her hand. I asked, "What do you need?" Without even looking up, she replied softly, "I just want a place where I can sleep in peace." In that moment, I saw the quiet exhaustion and stubborn pride buried deep in her heart. It wasn't a decision I made on a whim. I filed an official application with the state, went through assessments, interviews, training, and background checks, until finally she moved into my home. At first she always said she wouldn't stay long, that I'd eventually get tired of her. But bit by bit I helped her settle in, got her enrolled in school, provided everything she needed, even decorated her bedroom just the way she liked it. Over time our relationship began to shift. I remember clearly, she first called me Mom after one of our family dinners. I didn't say anything then. I just quietly cleared the dishes. But that one word, Mom, stayed with me for 3 years. Eventually I filed the formal adoption paperwork and made her part of my family in every legal sense. She was smart, lively, and full of opinions. And during that time I truly felt something warm return to my life. 3 years flew by. "Mom, it's chilly out here. Come on in," Lena said, clinging to my arm playfully. I smiled and nodded. "All right, let's go inside." As soon as we walked through the door, she grabbed my hand and grinned. "Mom, you've been so busy lately. You barely made it home last week. I was worried you wouldn't have time to get me a holiday gift, so I picked one out for you. Well, for me, really." She held up her phone, showing an ad for a luxurious lakefront villa. "I picked this one for you to give me. It's perfect, right? Prime location, amazing view, private dock. Isn't it incredible?" I looked at her beaming face, but a strange feeling stirred in my chest. Lena had always been calculating. I knew that much. But she was still young and I'd never wanted to be too harsh. I kept hoping she'd grow out of it someday. My gaze shifted to the screen. A newly built standalone villa on the banks of Cypress Creek Lake. Lately, it had become something of a status symbol in elite circles, all over social media as the latest luxury flex. On any other day I might not have thought much of it. But the company had just come through a crisis. I wasn't in the mood to take on extra spending. I didn't answer right away. Instead I asked calmly, "You already live here. Why do you need another house?" Her smile froze for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Mom, you work so hard during the day and you need your rest at night. My friends and I want to throw parties sometimes. I just don't want to bother you. Wouldn't it be easier if I had my own place? It'd be better for both of us." She kept talking, her tone light and coaxing, trying to make it sound reasonable. I turned and walked into the kitchen, slowly pouring myself a cup of coffee. My voice was even. This house has 3 floors. The soundproofing is excellent. If you want to have fun, go upstairs. You won't bother me. Her smile faded instantly, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. Mom, do you have to be so stingy? It's just $2 million. That's like a few months' income for you. I paused for a moment, holding my coffee as I walked back to the living room, my gaze calm and steady. It wasn't like I hadn't treated her well. Over the past 3 years I had given her everything. Clothes, a home, everything she could possibly need. I even brought her along to important business events. I had done everything a mother could. But never did I expect that one day she'd look me in the eye and call me stingy. Seeing me remain silent, Lena suddenly lowered her head. Her lips quivered and tears began to fall. I already told my friends I'd take them to see the new villa tomorrow. Are you really going to embarrass me like this? I didn't respond. I simply took a slow sip of my coffee and said calmly, if the villa means that much to you, then let me ask you something. I looked up at her, my voice steady and unhurried. That vacant villa by Cypress Creek, did you give it away? She froze. Her expression shifted ever so slightly. After a moment of hesitation she finally muttered, yes. I gave it to my father. And the Bentley? She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. I gave that to him too. I had suspected it all along, but I hadn't confronted her. I thought maybe she'd just loan them out for a while. Nothing worth a fuss. But hearing her admit it now stirred a deep, simmering irritation I could no longer ignore. My gaze turned colder, my voice lower. Didn't I tell you clearly not to handle any of my assets without permission? That hit a nerve. Her face flushed red, her eyes welled with tears, and her emotions began to spiral. That's easy for you to say. But he's my biological father. How can you call him someone else? The place you arranged for him is a dump. Just a glance and anyone can tell he's barely getting by. You really thought that rundown house was good enough for him? Giving him the villa was the least I could do. He's getting old. He never had anything nice in his whole life. What's so wrong with letting him drive a luxury car now? Her voice trembled as her frustration spilled out. You've got so much money. Why is it so hard for you to spare just a little for us? Just a little. It would change everything for us. She spoke like she was entirely in the right, as if everything she'd done was completely justified. In the past, maybe her tears would have softened me. Maybe I would have reached out, patted her shoulder and whispered, I'm sorry, I'd never hurt you. But now, it just felt absurd. So what you're saying is I'm supposed to support you and your entire family? You want me to use my money to give your father the life he's never earned? My voice turned cold, sharp as ice. Do you even know what he's done? He broke into several private estates and stole a pile of valuables. Lena's face went pale. If I hadn't intervened and smoothed things over, he'd be in prison by now. I didn't report him. That was already more mercy than he deserved. She bit her lip hard, her eyes suddenly dark with resentment. How can you talk about my father like that? She snapped, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I gave up living with him because of you. Can't you show him a little kindness for my sake? He made a mistake, so what? Can't money fix that? You're rich. Why can't you just be generous? I let out a cold laugh, the chill in my eyes unmistakable. And at that moment I saw her clearly for the first time. All the affection she claimed to have, it was just another transaction. She used the title of daughter as leverage to demand a better life. You owe me something today, she said, growing more agitated by the second. I waited for you all night. Don't think you can brush me off with a damn cup of coffee. I almost laughed out loud at her entitlement. The arrogance in her voice was so absurd, I didn't even try to hide my frustration anymore. I stood up, walked to the foyer, pulled the court's asset freeze notice from my bag and returned to the living room. I laid the document on the table in front of her. You wanted an explanation? I said quietly, my voice like a blade. Then take a good look. All of my assets have been frozen by court order. Lena's face froze instantly. She stared at me, a flicker of unease flashing through her eyes, as if she suddenly sensed something was terribly wrong. She took the document from the table and with just a glance, it was like a bucket of ice water had been poured over her. What does this mean? Her voice trembled, her lips quivering. She forced a smile, but it looked more pitiful than comforting. Mom, this freeze order, it's not yours, right? You're joking, aren't you? I don't want the villa anymore, okay? Just don't scare me like this. I let out a soft sigh and spoke gently. Lena, I need to tell you the truth. There's been an issue with the company. And as the legal representative, all my assets have been frozen. Her knees buckled slightly as she stumbled back a few steps, her face turning pale in an instant. It's just temporary, right? It'll be lifted soon, right? Mom, say something. I stayed silent, gently rubbing my temples. Her voice now carried a shrill panic. Don't do this. You're scaring me. Tell me this isn't permanent, please. I leaned back on the sofa, glanced down at the document in my hands, and let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. Maybe it'll be over in a few months. Maybe 10 years. Who knows? She stood there, stunned, her expression shifting rapidly. Then without warning she stormed toward me. For a moment I thought she finally understood. Finally realized that even without money she wouldn't abandon me. A faint warmth flickered in my heart. Maybe I hadn't misjudged her after all. But the next second she snatched the coffee cup from my hand and slammed it onto the floor. Porcelain shattered across the room. Oh my God, you're really sitting here sipping coffee at a time like this? Her voice dropped to a chilling growl, eyes filled with disgust. You make me sick. A broke woman pretending to be high and mighty? I must have been blind to ever call you my mother. You've got nothing now, so what the hell am I staying here for? I sat there in silence, staring at her. I couldn't find a single word to say. Every shred of softness left in me was being torn apart by her words. So this was it. Her warmth, her dependence, all of it was nothing but a byproduct of money. 3 years of effort, trust, and patience meant nothing to her. I steadied my breath and forced my voice to stay calm. Lena, money can be earned again. That doesn't mean. And how is that any different from being bankrupt? She screamed, cutting me off. Her cheeks flushed red with rage. No money means bankruptcy. What were you thinking? I stayed with you because I wanted a good life. If you can't even keep that, why would I stick around? Her words echoed through the living room, each one like a dagger to the heart. I looked at her quietly, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of my lips. And in that moment I understood something. Maybe this asset freeze wasn't such a tragedy after all. At least now I finally saw the truth. I had raised an ungrateful parasite through and through. Lena hadn't noticed the shift in my expression. She was still pacing around the living room, complaining without restraint. If I'd known you were this useless, I would have squeezed more money out of you while I had the chance. At least I wouldn't be stuck in this mess now. No way I'm going down with you. Doesn't your company still have a few houses and cars under its name? Sell them. At least give me a cut. She kept rambling, even pulling out a little notebook and scribbling down figures as if she were planning a financial strategy. I looked at her calmly and said, Don't you still have quite a bit of savings? Over the past 3 years, I've given you at least $70,000. Her tone sharpened instantly. That's my money. Her voice rose to a piercing pitch, full of rage. Florence, you're old already. If you end up on the streets, that's your problem. But I still have to take care of my father. Don't expect a single cent from me. I stared at her, my expression unreadable. I softened my voice deliberately, trying to test her. If you could just lend me a little, I might be able to turn things around. Once I'm back on my feet, you'd still enjoy the life you had before. Don't you want to help me? She froze for a second, then let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Do you think I'm stupid? Just look at you, grasping at straws like a miser. Even if I handed you the money, you really think I'd ever see it again? What a joke. And besides, you already got your assets frozen. If I hand over my money now, I might as well throw it in the trash. She waved her hand like she was shooing away a bothersome fly. You should really be figuring out what else you can sell. Add up everything you've got left. Maybe you can scrape enough together to buy a cheap apartment. At least you'll have somewhere to crash. I let out a soft, then said casually, Well, in that case I'll just sell off that house and car you gave your father too. You wouldn't dare. The words burst out of her mouth, pure reflex. But the moment they left her lips, she realized her slip and tried to cover it up with a forced cough. I mean, sell the stuff that no one's using. No point in letting it all sit around collecting dust. I didn't respond. I just stared at her in silence. I'd seen her true intentions clearly now. She was fine sharing the wealth, but never the hardship. The second she sensed I couldn't provide that comfortable lifestyle anymore, she was ready to cut ties and walk away. Fine. I'd make it easy for her. Oh, almost forgot, I said, deliberately slow, setting down my coffee cup. After the asset freeze, those houses were frozen too. So, looks like you'll be moving into a regular apartment with me. Of course it was a lie, just a test to see how she'd react. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she let out a sneer, her voice tinged with smug satisfaction. My dad was right. Women like you were always going to burn through everything eventually. He warned me not to put too much trust in you. Guess he saw through you better than I did. Good thing I came prepared. She pulled a printed document from the drawer and tossed it in front of me. Sign it. Since we've lived together for 3 years, I'm being generous. Once you sign, my father and I will file the petition with the court. She lifted her chin, looking down at me like she'd already won. If I'm in a good mood, maybe I'll send you some money every month. But don't get your hopes up. I'm not here to support you. I looked down at the statement, termination of adoption agreement. For a moment I just stared at it. Then I let out a quiet laugh. So that was it. She'd planned this all along. To her, I was never a mother, just an ATM on legs. And now that the balance was zero, she was canceling